This is Nicholas Alexiou, Department of Sociology and Hellenic American Project, Queen's College CUNY. And today we're very happy and pleased and honored to have an oral history interview for the HAPS archives with an exceptional Greek American artist and a person who has studied from many different angles issues regarding housing in New York and in Greece. Magda, welcome to the Hellenic American Project Oral History Archives. Please tell us your name, where you're born, and where you grew up. And first of all, I would like to thank you for accepting to give us this interview for the study of the Greek American community.
I want to tell you, Professor Alexiou, I'm so honored to sit with you today because the work that you've done on the Hellenic American Project has been so important to me over the past month since I've discovered it. So it feels like a real treat to be part of your work and part of this research project.
Thank you very much.
So my name is Magda Parasidis, and I was born in Athens, Greece, and my family and I moved to Astoria, directly to Queens, New York in 1980 as economic refugees, really. And
which part of Athens you grew up?
Well, I only lived in Greece until I was about 3. I was born in Lyosia, near Lyosia, so a working class neighborhood. I had a brother that was 8 years older than me. We lived in a small house in Petroupoli, what my mom describes as a shack. She was at that time a factory worker working in a very small sort of family enterprise, knitting sweaters, but on an industrial scale. And I think we received a green card, like lottery invite, through my mother's sister who had already settled in Astoria. And so getting that sort of legitimate invitation felt like, too good to ignore. So
this is very interesting. So it was a tradition in the family immigrating to the States.
Yes.
You have a recollection which decade your aunt came here to the States?
Both, 2 of my mother's siblings had already immigrated. So my aunt had immigrated, I think in the late 60s, early 70s through Canada into the United States. And my uncle before that was in the Merchant Marine, I think as early as the 50s, and jumped ship. So he lived illegally in New York and in Astoria for many years. And actually, spoke very often about his PTSD about being an undocumented immigrant in those years and how he felt, tracked and constantly in danger from, La Migra. So he was a restaurant worker for many years.
Very, very interesting. And also that period, it was the beginning. Since the 50s, but definitely 60s and 70s, when the other member came, it was the beginning or the period of the second mass wave of Greek immigration to the States, because we are probably the only European group that immigrated to the States twice in the same century. We started in 1900s until 1924. Then we had the anti-immigration laws of the States, and then it opened up after the Second World War. And basically 50s, 60s and 70s in particular was the second mass wave. 300,000 Greeks came that period. And that was also the creation, the time where Astoria was created. So when the family came, It was Astoria the destination?
It was. It was. Astoria was the destination in 1980. Yes. There was a built-in community ready for us. And in fact, my mother didn't speak any English at the time and continues not to speak English very well, because Astoria is a community that could accommodate that.
So you grew up within a community that was, the Greek element was visible and predominant, right? You
Absolutely.
school here in Astoria?
So we, within a few months of arriving, we lived initially with my mother's sister and her family, but within a few months of arriving, my mother heard a radio program called by a woman named Sadorineo.
Oh, Tina Santorineo, yes, of course.
Sadorineo,
A legend for many years, yes.
legendary in many Greek American households of my generation. So she heard an advertisement saying, if you are new to the country and you're looking for low income housing, you need housing, go and apply, to enter this public housing project, basically. So it was at the very, very start of when Marine Terrace housing, which is in Astoria, in Lower Ditmars, so by Astoria Park on 20th Street and 20th Avenue, this was going to be a new low-income housing community, and they reached out to the Greek community for applications. And so within the first 6 months, we were given an apartment, and this is where my mother raised my brother and I, and where she still lives.
Oh, very, very, very interesting. Yes, and this area is close to the Astoria Park and Hellgate, which is the landmark of Astoria. You mean that area, right? Around there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a housing community that's, I think, between 200 and 300 units, and it begins at the border of Astoria Park, flanking the East River, and continues all along the Con Edison electrical plant. So it's sort of tucked at the very edge of Astoria.
So growing up, it was the environment at home or in the neighborhood. It was a Greek environment. You hear the Greek language, the food, the music, the interactions with other children of your age.
It's interesting. I've been thinking more about this, and it's interesting that Astoria as a whole was certainly and continues to be a Greek community, and but also in this little pocket, in Marine Terrace, there was a mix of sort of Greek families and other immigrant families, Latino and Black families, but there was such a solidarity, I think, among the Greeks. Right, so we're all speaking Greek, and these were all new immigrants. So Greek language is spoken at home. Many of the parents hadn't yet learned English. So it was like a pocket within a pocket, like a little Greek enclave, a little poor Greek enclave, within this larger Astoria.
And you finished school, elementary and high school in Astoria or in other parts of New York?
I attended public school in Astoria, and then by middle school, there was a wonderful sort of magnet program in my local school. They had placed a magnet program in the local school and were busing children in from the rest of Queens, to give special services to these children that had been identified as gifted. And so I was fortunate enough to be, prepared in such a way that I entered a specialized high school. And so for high school, I went to the Bronx Science. And so I would travel daily between Astoria and the Bronx, by bus. And so that really opened up, my vista. of New York, and the understanding sort of myself as a Greek American within this larger context. So it was a sort of a big deal for me to leave Astoria for school.
So, so growing up, you're forming an ethnic identity as a Greek American, or more as an American?
I'm certainly very aware of being a Greek American, and of the, you know, this stark difference between being within my household, you know, where we're speaking in Greek, you know, the food is Greek, our, you know, traditions are customs, and then sort of being, you know, this secondary thing outside of the home. So absolutely, that was a strong element, and it felt especially strong, you know, in the first years, like between like 80 and like 95. You know, the Greeks they were young, they were new immigrants, they were new Americans, so it really felt tethered to where they had, you know, come from. And there were so many cultural events at that time. I remember growing up, there were festivals, there were concerts, there were places like a Crystal Palace that would host musicians. Right? So it was sort of ever present. There were always cultural events, especially around music, happening.
That's true. Theater also, yeah, a lot of theater, films, yes, the film festivals, yeah, this is true. All this time growing up, you had a chance to visit Greece at all, either as, for vacation or other reasons?
Yeah, it was incredibly important to my mother that we go to Greece often. So even when she couldn't leave, either for, you know, work or economic reasons, she would send me to Greece. So I certainly grew up going to Greece most summers.
And how your friends and siblings were, you know, perceived you as an American, as a Greek American? How was their reception of you coming from New York?
You're saying in Greece, how was I perceived?
Yes.
I mean, I think that even I speak Greek and we spoke Greek at home, but even regardless, you know, when I'm in Greece, my Greek is different. My vocabulary is different, and my diction is different, and my cultural references are different. So, you know, I was a Greek American child, and it's, you know, who I am. I'm Greek American. So I'm certainly embraced, you know, as part of the family, and as, you know, something, as a person that is familiar, you know, with the culture, but it's certainly not the same thing, you know.
See, well, from various discussions we had before this interview today, and we spoke in Greek in many instances, and your Greek is very nice. And still, I mean, is this still the general perception as it was then, or now they are more familiar with your background and development? Is still that case when you visit Greece now?
I think it really is the same. I think that
That's
as
interesting.
immigrants, we develop a culture apart, you know, that's neither Greek nor American. It truly is Greek American. So and it seeps into your, even if you do speak Greek very well, it seeps sort of into your language and into the way your body moves, into the way you walk. I really do feel like I'm something different than just Greek. You know, you carry sort of all of your cultural inheritance. You carry all of that, I think, on you.
But you, as a young adult, going there and seeing the environment, seeing Greece going through different phases, a country which traditionally exported immigrants. We are part of this, right? Coming to the States in different times. And then the time you visited Greece, Greece started receiving immigrants. and it was some kind of not class, but some kind of huge debate. It was difficult for some groups, some small or not that small part of the Greek population to understand the immigrants coming to Greece. You were aware of that? Greece changing, receiving immigrants, and
Certainly.
conflicts. And what was your thinking of this?
My reflection on that is really twofold. The first part is that I traveled to Greece as a child. My home in New York was in public housing. So I'm already aware of sort of a class difference between myself and other Greek Americans. So when I'm traveling to Greece and seeing my family and how they live, although the family is humble, they seem to live with a certain dignity that was different than how I was living in the United States, okay? There are degradations and humiliations that come with being a poor person or a poor immigrant. So my perspective was a little different because I would go to Greece not as, the rich American or, the middle class American. I was going from a certain perspective. So there's that. And I'm seeing my family in Greece sort of living humbly, but comfortably and with a sense of autonomy that I had never known because we didn't have that. So there's that.
Very interesting. But while in college or after college, it was any time that you thought you could go back and repatriate, go back and live in Greece, or you thought that, well, my place is in New York, it is in America. Was Greece
yeah, I think that a recurring theme between my brother and I especially, I mean, he was 11 when he left Greece. So a running theme has always been, who would we have been? Who would we have been if we weren't taken from our homes? So it had always been a question. And in fact, when I went to university, I thought I would study international relations so that I could be a diplomat and move back to Greece and be able to live in Europe. So yeah, that dream has always persisted of can I get myself back there in some way.
And at what time this curiosity about the arts came to you? Because you had some great education from Brock Science and then in a good university with international relations, and then when you saw the arts as a possibility to pursue?
I think I was always drawn to the arts, and it's how I identified, but I wouldn't say that, it's how the things I was reading or what I was looking at, or being a teenager in New York and going to Soho or the Village and sort of seeing what a life in the arts could look like. I mean, that's always what I wanted. It just didn't feel practical. That wasn't the communication, that a life in the arts could be something that was viable to live on. But when I did get to Johns Hopkins, I think even in my very first semester, I took a course in the history of art. And that sealed it, that it was really over at that moment. I was like, look, there are people that are spending their lives sort of thinking about these things and living in a realm of ideas. And that's one of the things about, being a first generation immigrant, is that that's not really communicated, that you could make a life in the realm of ideas. Yeah. There's a real practicality to life.
This is what you said about the immigrant generation. Although you came here, as a newborn practically, and you are a 1+ generation, as sociologists argue, you feel that you grew up as an immigrant generation.
Certainly.
This is very interesting what you said. Yeah.
In every way. In
Yeah.
every way. And I think it had to do with, with the speaking Greek at home and the newness of the experience and not having established, an established history or established roots here.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that things change with my children, but certainly for me, yeah, I'm absolutely an immigrant, even though I lived, 97% of my life here.
How important is that your children keep some of the Greek background or culture? What things you like them to transmit to them, Greek background?
Um, I want them to know themselves as Greek. And so the first and foremost is we speak Greek in our household, only Greek in our household. Um, I almost feel like they couldn't know me or, or their extended family without it. So we travel to Greece often, and we've kept all the traditions that my mother imparted to me. It's really a question of being known, of being known by my children. And I think that they would lose like sort of knowing a huge portion of me if we don't sort of maintain our cultural identity.
Excellent. Well, you had some great opportunities to study in some programs that you went about the arts. So do you think that New York is a place where artists can thrive? New York is a metropolis, and as we said some other time, that metropolis usually import art. I mean, yeah, so they invite, it is a magnet for many artists to send their works, or the role of the museums, what they present, etc. But regarding the natives, regarding people who live in New York and want to create art, is New York a place for creating art?
I have to say, I haven't lived in New York City for 10 years. So, my artistic production happens outside of New York. So economically, as a place where, an artist can work, can live and work, New York doesn't seem like the most, open place to that. But I think the culture of New York, right? The artistic spaces, the spaces that are outside of, institutions. The street itself is it has been everything to me. I mean, it's how all of the artistic language that I use and employ in my practice comes directly from my experience of New York, the ethos of the street. So, I don't know. It's the art metropolis.
That's true. Close to Astoria was Long Island City, and it was the famous the 5 Points area, which of course went through hell, conflict with the city, with developers. And since your theme, you are also socially and political awareness that you bring into your work. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, spaces like 5 Points were incredibly important to me and my contemporaries. So I can tell you, in the past, 20 years, 30 years, whoever had been coming up in in Queens or in Astoria, whether Greek American or not, anyone that was looking at street culture or identifying with street culture was also looking at the street art production at 5 Points, which is, just a few minutes from Astoria. There is also, a movement around the Hell's Gate Bridge and Astoria Park of both skateboarders, graffiti artists, hip hop artists. And so in my work and in the work of most street artists, we're interested in, the kind of creative output that comes out of urban spaces. And Astoria is one of those spaces. And I wish it were, sort of more talked about, or a realization that I didn't have to come to so much later, that I was actually in a cultural milieu right there, that there was actually something happening right then and there, in Astoria. And I now, thinking back, I think of all of the sort of older artists living in Marine Terrace in Astoria. There's an amazing amount of Greek American artists active, poets, singers, disc jockeys. Just it didn't seem, or I had not discovered a community where these things were gathered, where I could, sort of identify myself as part of something larger than myself. That was missing.
Yeah, this is interesting. And where do you live now? And is there any Greek community where you live now?
Yeah, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and we've been here for 7 years. My husband is an academic, so we moved here and he teaches at Ohio State. And there's a huge Greek community, and huge. I can't tell you a number, but they are everywhere. The difference I've noticed between the Greek American community in Columbus and that of New York is that these Greeks have been here longer. So they're more deeply rooted, second, third, fourth generation Greeks. So the experience of being in a part of a Greek community like this is quite different.
Yeah. And since you have created a large part of your artistic work in that area, this is true, right? This is where
yes, it is true.
How they perceive your work, how the Greek American community understands your work or receives it.
I'm not sure that that I've intentionally shared it with the Greek American community here in the way that you might intend. What I found interesting is that, I had to leave, the urban space of New York and sort of come to this, much milder environment. And I'm actually live in a suburb. So I had to leave sort of that space in order to be able to really, look at it. And it was almost being away that made me have to make the work that I make, have to ask those questions that I do in my work. I haven't shared my work in a super intentional way with the Greek American community that I'm part of here. I think they know me as an artist and come to openings and feel great sort of about that kind of success, but I don't know how much they're engaged in the questions that I'm asking in the work.
Yeah. Do you know other Greek American painters or artists in general?
I have to tell you, this is part of the reason why the Hellenic American Project has been so important to me. Sort of having this hub of being able to learn about other Greek American artists has just been so rewarding. The Greek artists that I know are the Greek artists sort of that are in institutions, like I went to the Whitney last month and there was work up by Luca Samaras, there was work up by Chryso. And so, I'm aware in that way, but I have never been connected in a meaningful way to people working now
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing this, because that was one of the reasons about the existence of HUB, to do so, to document that. And you're right. It is a plethora. It is a large number of Greek American artists. Only we don't know that, and part of it is that Greek American studies are not part of the curriculum or the curricula in Greek American schools or universities. In some cases, recently you have some development, but still, although there are so many um, Greek studies around, the area, we don't have a focus on Greek American history, in particular the cultural production, the artistic communities, and I hope our dialogue, our documentation will encourage them to include it, uh, as you said. But all this time, you are in contact with Greece and what's happening in Greece. You know about the austerity years, the big economic crisis started from the States in 2008 and continue in Europe and in Greece until very recently. What do you think of Greece? All these years that you visit and see and hear stories, is any kind of progress regarding economic development or otherwise?
I, there were so many changes in my family, that I could perceive
Mhm.
after 2008, and it was quite dramatic at that time. I've been so inspired by the ways Greeks have resisted, so all the forms of resistance, whether it was young people moving back to their to their land, right? So like going back to the island, or farming or creating businesses, their place of origin. I found that incredibly sort of inspiring, politically, like as a political resistance, right, to the austerity measures. And I think that culturally there's been so much progress.
Mm.
Culturally, we've been able to talk about so much. Even the way we communicate, who we are. Like there's a campaign in the Greek airport. It's a visual campaign, and it says, this is Greece. And it's not just images of the beach and, these idyllic vistas. It's also, art museums and handicrafts and what we make. And, so that I felt was sort of progress and different, and like a different way of representing oneself.
Mhm.
And then, we can think about all of the anti-authoritarian movements in Greece, and occupied zones in Greece, and all the actual, resistance from the left that creates a dialogue, pushes up against what's acceptable, to young people. So I find it incredibly optimistic.
Mhm.
I find it incredibly inspiring.
And
The Greek response to it all.
mhm. Yeah, because I remember in the beginning of the crisis, Greece was stigmatized. I remember here in New York, my non-Greek friends, even some Greek friends, they were very critical of that without realizing the global or the big picture of the crisis. And Greeks were stigmatized. You felt that? You felt that Greeks in the States were stigmatized
Hmm.
crisis?
I felt like the discussions were so one-dimensional.
Mhm.
It's the same kind of discussions we have about
Mhm.
poverty, about racism, but we criminalize the poor.
Mhm.
We criminalize people that are hurt by larger economic forces. So that criticism, that stigma that you talk about, was simply an opportunity to have a more nuanced conversation about global economic forces, yeah, and what we do to to people of the global South.
From my understanding from this discussion is that you feel very comfortable and very compatible about being Greek and being an American. Is this true? You feel that balance, or sometimes it's a conflict?
I do feel that balance. It's part of my identity. I think that where the conflict comes in is when you leave your home and you're in the outside world. I may visually read as a white American woman, and so there's a lapse in understanding, right? It's like I understand myself as a Greek American, quite with an experience quite different, than a white American woman. So it's just, it's that dichotomy of identity.
And this is how your friends perceive you, the American friends. They know that you're Greek. They understand you as a Greek, or you're part of the American society also.
No, they certainly understand me as Greek, and part of that has to do with speaking Greek with my children, and part of it has to do with our commitment to spending a portion of the year in Greece. So it's part of our year is being able to be there, and a lot of our professional choices are such so that we have the 2 or 3 months to be in Greece every year. So I'm certainly, my close friends understand me as Greek American.
Very, very easy. But you still feel that the American society, it is a society that supports diversity, supports this multiculturalism. Although recently we had some political crisis, right, with polarization, with the movement, especially after the sad event, the criminal event with George Floyd, and the new movements that emerge. How you perceive that? How you receive that as an artist, as a citizen?
Yeah, it's been an incredibly important moment. I think for all of us, but for me and my concerns and my work, these movements are not new. It's been an opportunity for sort of American culture to zero in on these movements that have been active, at least since, the 60s. These movements have been active, and critical race theorists have been talking about all of these things for decades. It was an opportunity for the conversation to sort of refocus, and for all of us to have a new vocabulary around what happens around us. One of the most interesting things about moving to a place like Columbus and living in a suburb is to see sort of firsthand, in a way that I had never seen before, how easy it is to completely ignore other people's experiences. So I live in an affluent, predominantly white suburb, where none of the concerns that I had in Queens, or that a person living, in an urban environment has. They could live their lives completely sort of sheltered from these very real concerns. And I think that the work that I've made, in the past 5 or 10 years is directly related to that experience.
I don't want to go in depth now about your work, because I want to say more on the interview about the artist, where you're going to say more things there. But since we touched it, let's mention some of the major characteristics. You bring through your art some of the parameters the social and political dimensions of urban spaces, between what is public and what is private, how they if there is any conflict there, and especially the housing. When my friends from Greece visited me, and they love New York and this, and when they hear the prices, renting or buying a house, they cannot believe it. They think that it is something out of this world. And I keep telling them that maybe the states have or give opportunity to groups from time to time to have a socioeconomic mobility. Still, housing remains one of the biggest problems. Is this true? I mean, how you deal with all this?
Yeah. Just from my experience, growing up in New York, without the public housing, I think we would have been homeless, to be quite honest, without affordable housing. So yeah, in my work, I look a lot at the architecture of poverty, sort of the landscape of poverty. And yeah, I don't think about so much. I'm not thinking about the status of housing in New York City as much as I'm thinking about what does the landscape tell us about sort of who we are, how we're considered, and what our relationship is to the state.
Especially now, because of the pandemic. The pandemic brought further in front the problems that already existed as far as concern health issues or housing. And big cities like New York, was in disarray, especially Queens, which was hit very hard in the early days of the pandemic because of the strong working class background of the borough, and also the housing. Then the debates about rent, helping people with their rent or the eviction moratorium. So what we live now, it is the problem became more acute. So tell us about that. I mean, are we able as a society to create and replan, redesign our cities, our policies?
Yeah, the past 2 years have been such an opportunity to really meditate on the chasms, the inequality, and how it touches sort of every area, right, from housing to health to life expectancies, to education. So it's a moment. I think it's a really advantageous moment, even though all this inequality has sort of come into focus. It's a moment where people are thinking about new futures, about new ways of being together, about new ways of organizing. And all of that feels, again, incredibly optimistic to me. Yeah, I've lost my train of thought, but
yeah, one of the big failures that the former mayor was accused or attached to was his failure to produce what he had promised, more affordable housing. And then the policies that both the state and the city applied during the pandemic were very catastrophic for many groups. So it is an issue how the market, or if the market will continue to dictate who lives where and under which conditions. As you said, the private sector and the public sector. Do we have, as an artist, do you feel that, and also as a citizen, of course, as human beings, we have a right to public spaces, to more access to housing, to health, etc.
One of the amazing things that happened during the first year or year and a half of the pandemic was almost instituting a universal basic income, right? So unemployment was increased so widely that for many people it seemed very, very similar to the sort of the left's question of should we all have a universal basic income. That happened. A lot of us experienced that, especially artists and other people receiving unemployment benefits. We've experienced that, and studies have shown in the past 6 months that the levels of poverty have actually gone down as a result of those state policies. So here's another chance to see, some of those policies of the left, some of those ideals of the left, of having a universal basic income, of having housing as a human right, which is how it was perceived at the turn of the century when slums started coming down and the state was actively involved in creating housing for people. There's a way to recuperate some of those ideas and employ them now. I hope that it doesn't just sort of all fizzle out and go back to like this market ideology of the market corrects all. Like we've seen things, sort of policies of the left implemented and working and improving situations for people. So I don't know how in the midst of all sort of the suffering and these really critical moments, somehow these sparks of hope and sparks of arranging things differently seem to emerge.
Very interesting, especially with the approval of the new budget, the new administration to invest a lot of money for infrastructure and other things. Are you optimistic that things will happen properly?
I don't know. I don't know. What I know is that there are millions of people thinking about how to do things differently and committed to doing things differently. And radical politics are not so radical, after the past 2 years that we've experienced. So to me, that's hopeful.
Very interesting. In a general sense, what do you like to say to the newcomers from Greece now? So some people, because still some people are trying to leave Greece and find opportunities in other countries. Of course, Europe is their first choice, but some of them, they keep coming to the States. What is your advice to these young Greeks who think to come to the States?
I mean, I think I'm so grateful to the United States. My life is a testimony to what can happen here, that one can, sort of become, a version of themselves in a new place is exciting and possible. So I don't think I have some, words of advice other than, to retain one's identity, within this larger sphere, and to learn, and actually to learn from others. I mean, it's an incredible space to be able to sort of be yourself alongside with others. Unlike any other, I think. Yeah.
I think this is a very, very important way to see things, because in a more global society that we live, we need to have to find this strength within us to fight for our gaining this access. And if democratic societies still offer that, no matter where they are, I think we should pursue it. And you're very right saying that the states still might be a great experiment in creating opportunities for some kind of socio-economic and cultural movement. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I would like to conclude our oral history interview, which was very interesting, and I think the social and political insights that you brought are extremely important. Being a woman, being an immigrant, and being an artist at the same time. And I'm sure that we're going to have a chance to discuss more of this on our interview for Greek American artists. Thank you very much for this, and we're going to continue on our second interview. Thank you very much, Magda.
Thank you, Professor Alexou.